Darren, at this point, does everyone who's attending have audio?
Yes, they should.
Okay, thanks. Welcome, everyone. We'll be starting just at the top of the hour. We're glad that you're here. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. I think we're expecting a few more people, but hopefully they'll catch up soon. Good afternoon, East Coasters and everyone in the Central Time Zone. Good morning to everyone to the left of us. Welcome. I'm Dan Mello. I'm the CIID lead for Targeted and Universal TA. Here to welcome you to our December webinar, aptly named Generate a First Person Perspective. So today we're changing up our format a little bit. We're going to have a half hour of webinar, and I'm going to keep this introduction appropriately brief and get right to the agenda. On our next slide is a brief agenda. We're here today to learn about the Generate user experience and its impact on data quality and process. First, we'll hear from Washington about the process that they had for their data submissions before implementing Generate. We'll have our demonstration to demonstrate some of the aspects of the user experience we want to focus on. And then a key conversation about the way Washington State experiences Generate. We'll reflect on some of those important user interface experiences. So on our next slide, I want to let you know that today we're led by Emily Rang, who's our fantastic intensive TA lead at CIID, Liz Brunet, who's an expert CIID TA provider, and Sandy Grummick, who's the, I think, 2019 and 2020 Data Manager of the Year. So, wow, that's not a real thing, but Sandy's a fantastic data manager, lots of experience in Washington. I've worked with her a bit, so I think it's going to be a rich discussion today. And I think I'll start us off by actually turning to Sandy, who's going to give us a little bit of that background. Talk a little bit, please, about when you implemented Generate in Washington and the files that you're working with, so we have some idea.
Great, and you did make me laugh out loud. Thankfully,
Okay.
I was muted. So Washington began the process of implementing Generate in 2018. We brought together a big group to go through all of the requirements and started putting all of our data in CIID, and that was really great to get us started. The first file we submitted was the file spec 029, our directory file. And then from there, we've been submitting child count, which is 089 and 002. And that consists of 5 EDFACS files, and then all of those lovely discipline files, which I think culminate up to 12 total files. And then, did you want me to go on about the process that we used prior to? So Depending, the collection varied by file spec, but the bottom line is regardless of how I received the data from the LEAs, I had to manually manipulate everything, usually putting it into Excel and making sure I had the correct format for the EDFACS files, which we all know can be really difficult, to make sure that we're getting things in the correct columns and making sure we had all of the fields with the zero counts. We had great tools that other states had shared with us and other TA providers, but as you all know, it wasn't fail-proof. So that was kind of our process prior to Generate.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. So as Dan said a minute ago, my name is Liz. Nice to see you all. Before we dig into the demonstration of the UI, I kind of just wanted to walk you through a little bit of behind the scenes of what's happening within Generate. So this image shows movement of data through Generate, specific to the EDFACS reporting. So you can see there that there are 4 data flows. So the staging tables, the CEDS integrated data store, or the IDS, the CEDS data warehouse, and then the semantic model. That first piece, excuse me, the staging tables, is really where the source to staging migration code is written. It's where the data from the source gets moved into Generate and where most of the ETL work is completed. The next, the CEDS integrated data store in yellow. This is where the data from staging moves into the CEDS integrated data store. This is, sorry guys, this is the integrated data store. That means it's also the CEDS data standard, meaning that every element within CEDS is within the IDS. The next is the data warehouse. The data warehouse is a longitudinal structure, and it contains all of the data elements necessary to support the EDFACS reporting. And that fourth and final piece is the semantic layer. This is once the data has been loaded into the longitudinal structure of the data warehouse, it's then pushed into the report tables there within the semantic layer. This layer provides consistent interpreting of data, which is great for business users. They can come in and put any Power BI tool on top of it and be accessing the same model. So that's really important to be aware of. Okay. Next, we're going to dive into the UI of Generate. So again, that was just a little bit of background of it. When you log into Generate, this is the screen that you will see. What we are really going to be focusing on today is the settings over here on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll briefly be talking specific to Toggle and then dive into the data store, the different migrations that we kind of just walked through within that image. All right, so first, when getting into Generate, the first thing you're going to do is log in and click on that toggle piece that we just looked at. So this is the screen. It's going to be really similar to this. This is just an example of what is available on Toggle. This is where states come in and they define specific values for Generate to use. An important thing to remember when setting all this up is that when you're actually running the migrations and Generate creates the reports, it's using all of these values that a state defines. So be sure to get into Toggle, set all these things, answer all these questions before running your migration so that these values are set specific to your state. So in this example, you can see there's a specific, you may have to answer something like a yes, no, set specific dates that is required of the state if it's specific to whatever the question be asking. And then in that third one, it may even be something like a specific age or something like that in which you would choose what was specific to you all and then go ahead and press save. Once you have set all of those values, then you would go back to that main UI page and you're ready to, at that point, run your migrations. From there, again, you would click on that settings cog and go down to data store. And you can see there that there's the 3 different migrations. So we have the ODS IDS migration, the RDS migration, and then the reports migration. So the first one we're going to look at and run is the ODS IDS migration. Okay, so when you click on that, you're going to get this screen. And again, just a reminder, this is the migration that migrates data from source system into staging, and then from staging into the actual CEDS IDS. So here you're going to choose the specific school year and then the individual procedure that you want to run. Once you have those chosen, then you would click Migrate to Operational Data Store. You're going to press Confirm OK. And then this shows you that the actual migration has kicked off. As you're waiting, it may take a few minutes depending on how much data you have. You'll see your progress through this screen here. You can cancel or go back to Data Store if you wanted to do that during the migration. Once it's complete, you'll get this screen that has shown that your process is successful. It'll show the procedure and the school year, everything that you had chosen at the beginning of the migration. From there, once that's complete, then you're ready to run the RDS migration. So at this point, you can click go back to Data Store. And then again, you're going to be brought back to this main screen where you're ready to start the RDS migration. And again, this is where the data is moved from the IDS or Integrated Data Store into the CEDS data warehouse. So choose RDS migration. These screens look really similar. So again, you're going to pick the specific school year and then the procedure that you want to run, and then migrate data. You're going to get the confirm, OK, or cancel. And then again, that screen pops up that it's been started, and then your progress, excuse me. One thing to just call out is that there is a timeout of 20 minutes within the tool. If you just move your mouse around, that time will start over again. And if you haven't moved around in 15 minutes, it gives you a 5-minute warning that there's inactivity. So again, just moving your mouse around restarts that timer. Again, the screen is really similar here. Your process has been successful for this specific procedure that you chose. So you could go back to Data Store. And then you're ready to run the final report, which is the report migrations. This migration pulls data out of the data warehouse and applies the file specification logic to it, which then populates the report tables. After that migration has been done and those tables have been populated, then at that point you're ready to create your submission file through the user interface. And we'll get to that here in a second. We'll show you that. So here you're going to choose the specific school year and the report, migrate to Data Store. It'll show your progress and then whether it's been successful. So like I said, at that point, you're now ready to actually create the file. So you would go back to the Data Store. One thing to just call out, this is typically where the handoff between the EdFax coordinator and a Part B data manager occurs. So at this point now, Part B data manager could come in, they could click on that standard reports dropdown, and then the EdFax reports, and it would bring you to this screen. So here you would choose the individual report that you wanted to generate, a specific school year it was associated with, and then the level at which you wanted to do. So you could choose state, district, school. Once that is complete, once you have chosen those items, then this screen will generate. So you can see here, this is your actual file. You have the ability to export to Excel. One thing to highlight is when you do export, this will be identical to, the screen here will be identical to your export that you see. So you can come in here, look at your numbers, validate them. And then once this file has been generated, download, and saved, then you can use this to actually submit to EdFacs. One thing just calling out quick is that when you click on that export to Excel, you're provided with these 3 options, file formats that you would like to use. And that is it for the UI demo. Any questions? Okay.
Thanks, Liz. That was great. A really nice way to demonstrate the process within a virtual share here. We didn't have to experience one of those 10-minute timeouts. I appreciate that. We had one question from Marlene in Iowa. Do states' data get stored in the CEDS data warehouse somewhere? And there's a request also to see how some of the tool can support program folks in exploring these data. So yeah, welcome Liz or Emily, Sandy, to reflect on your experience. We have a few more questions coming in. Emily is going to address the BI question. And Emily, who is monitoring the chat, can you let me know if the other question was addressed? I've lost it.
This is Bill. I can address the question from Marlene. Yes, the state data does get stored in the data warehouse, Marlene.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was one of the migrations that happened, as Liz was kind of quickly moving through one of the final migrations is to move that data into the CEDS data warehouse. So, and yeah, we can, sometimes it's easier if we have that. Slide 4 is the.
I was going to pull up that image.
Yeah, let me just touch on this for a minute. There we go. So as Liz was talking, she's literally moving data from those blue circles into the staging tables and then into the integrated data store in the data warehouse. It's just that small subset of information that's needed for EdFacs reporting. If you think about the CEDS data warehouse being all of the CEDS data warehouse elements, it's much bigger. So Liz was in Generate picking the specific data she wanted to migrate for a very specific report. So it's just a portion of that migrates into the data warehouse, but it's absolutely in the CEDS data warehouse format when that data moves over. And June, you had a question about the EdFacs report coming from the system as a CSV file and then uploaded into ESS. You're exactly right. So, and Liz, you don't have to navigate there, but there's that very last slide that Liz showed where you had the ways of exporting your submission file. That literally is the EdFacs file in the format for submission, which then you could upload into the into ESS, right? So that's kind of the idea. And Gretchen, so Gretchen has a question about how the data gets validated and can you see which data fields are used to make up the final results? I'm gonna hold on that question along with Wendy's question. I think when we get to the question and answers here that we're gonna do with Sandy, maybe we'll just move into that section here. I think we'll touch on these, but if not, maybe Sandy and I can kind of talk about what Sandy did and how she does it. In terms of the data validation, we can talk more broadly about data quality with Generate. So Gretchen, hold on to that question and let's see if we capture it. So Sandy, I'm gonna have you talk a little bit about how the process has changed. So you talked at the beginning a little bit about the process that you used to use of taking the ginormous student level extract for your state data and having to aggregate that yourself using various fancy tools such as Excel pivot tables and access databases and other things to compile that data. But how has that process changed since you started being able to use Generate?
So going back to what Liz showed you of how everything is connected, and I don't even know all of that, all that stuff that happens in the back with Generate's connecting with our statewide student database now, so that data has been mapped. And it does take a lot of work, but it is so valuable to map that work and those processes for your state. So as that data is mapped now, it goes into Generate, and we are very confident in our quality of data now in Generate. It has helped us find some mapping errors we had in the past, maybe some calculation errors. So we feel like our data is very high quality now, and we're very confident in it. So that's kind of how that's all changed. It just makes the process where Liz was showing, where you can go in and choose a file spec and then choose your level and your sub level or your category to create your file spec. That happens in like seconds, and you have a CSV file ready to go, and it will pass all of the file checks, and it will also support those missing zeros that have been the bane of most of ours pain over the years in submitting those files to EdFax, especially if you've mapped your data properly following in that toggle section that Liz was showing. That mirrors your SSS IDEA data survey that we do every year. And so you will pass all of those checks as well. So that's really nice. And the other thing is in October of this year, October 18th, I suddenly had no EdFax coordinator, and I still had the discipline and exiting files to submit to EdFax this year, and I kind of had a momentary panic, but then Emily and her gang, Ruth, they all said, no, go into Generate, and I was able to successfully create those files and get them submitted in a timely fashion. So Generate rescued me totally this year. So I know
Sandy,
that was long, but sorry.
That's all right. But can you talk a little bit about what you did in Generate to kind of like, so for the discipline files specifically, this year, you went in and looked at that EdFax submission report. And Liz, maybe we can go to that screen. This is what I think you were talking about.
Yeah. This is so fun. I told Emily thought I was crazy. I said, Emily, this is so fun. You go in and you choose you select your report. It defaults to the current school year, and then you select your level and your category set, and you can view your data to make sure it matches. Like, you know, most of us data managers are pretty anal about our data, so I made sure that this matched what I had done in my legacy files, and then I was able to quickly generate the CSV file for the EdFax submissions.
Well, and I think the part that, you know, like, so the human readable version on the screen here, right? Like that's the part that you had talked about with me previously was helpful, right? Like you can actually see the categories and you have headers, right? Mm-hmm. And the same data from this nice view of the report is what creates your CSV file, right? There's no like, it's not like it's an additional report you have to then go kind of make sure, right? So if it looks good on this report, then when you're submitting when you actually download the CSV for ESS, it's the same data. Right?
Yeah.
I know in the past that had been something, you know, where if you're creating the different file spectra, I was kind of comparing, making sure you're using the right data set. It's nice to just be able to see that here.
And it was nice because the naming process was exactly what was required for your EdFax submissions too. So you didn't have to rename anything. The headers were all there properly. So it literally took seconds to create those files.
All the stuff you were doing by hand, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and then having to confirm.
Yeah, and putting into different tools to make sure that I had all of the fields and everything. So yeah.
So I want to try to touch on Gretchen's question a little bit, kind of related to this. So thinking about the more efficient process, but in thinking, like you talked a little bit about the mapping, right? So you went through this process of mapping your CEDS data to CEDS, and then I know you said our team worked our magic behind the scenes, but what did that kind of look like, right? Like Ruth, your developer, sent you questions about your data, right? So she found things that she wasn't sure if they were the right things or not, looking at generate. And then what did you do after that?
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember. No, I'm kidding. We worked back and forth, our EdFax coordinator at the time, and Ruth and I, a lot of that fell on the EdFax coordinator, but we did work back and forth to make sure that our definitions were correct, especially with EdFax definitions. And we found some places where they weren't correct. And so we were able to change and fix some issues on our end that we didn't even realize we had. And it was a really good back and forth process. Our developer would process some of the files through Generate, and if there were errors, we were able to quickly resolve those and just work through all of the different nuances that each state has around, especially discipline. Discipline can get really crazy with the different calculations and summarizing of incidents and things like that.
Great. Awesome. Anything else I'm thinking about? So improvements, and then what are some of the things you guys are working towards in the future, or where do you anticipate doing more work?
Yeah, so we are really close. I believe this year we'll be able to submit our exiting file, that 009, which is extremely important, as most of the data managers and program staff out there know, because those impact a couple of your federal performance indicators. And I'm hoping to work toward the assessment files, but we're kind of on hold with that, with the changes that OMB has out for comment right now. But that would be nice to have the assessment files as our next steps.
Awesome. And I know that we didn't really talk about this, but or at least recently, but something you had said to me previously, Sandy, was thinking about, like, now that you have the data in Generate, and one of the things that Liz showed was thinking about the data being in that reporting data warehouse structure. Do you anticipate potentially trying to use the reports from Generate or the data from Generate in other ways in the future? Is that something you guys have considered?
Yeah, there's a section in there, and I know we didn't really go over it too much, but about the state performance plan and the annual performance report. There are that data in there, so I'm hoping to get in there and look at that and see how we can utilize Generate in our state performance plan work, because you all know how much time and effort that takes to do those analysis. And as of tomorrow, my data consultant, my right hand, Tyler, is not going to be with me, so I'm kind of on my own, and you know, all know how long it takes to fill positions in state agencies, so I've got to be as efficient with my time as possible. So I'm hoping to utilize more and more of the tools in Generate.
Awesome. think that's the end of our questions, and hopefully I touched on most of the questions that we got in the chat. We have such a short amount of time. We might, if we didn't get to your question, we didn't fully answer it, please do reach out to us. We have our contact information at the end. So I turn it over to Dan.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. On your screen now, folks, is the evaluation link that accompanies this webinar. We take seriously and utilize all of your feedback. I invite you to click now while we have a few minutes. If you'd like to copy and paste, Judy has placed it, thank you, Judy, into the chat. So you can grab that control C and control what? V. Wow, blanked. I think we did a lot of learning today. It was really nice to have this demonstration. I'd like to thank Liz for doing the demo, and thank Sandy for sharing your perspective, and Emily for helping facilitate. I heard a story in Washington about, what was the line? It wasn't foolproof before. And I think that's the way a lot of data managers feel about their data submission, and it really requires a high level of effort and attention and skill to get your data in. And we saw a lot of those challenges resolve after the implementation of Generate and as it's managed by the expert staff in Washington. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Once again, I would ask you, go ahead and give that link a copy paste. And thanks for participating and completing the survey. Take care. Have a great holiday season.